The laughter carried through the marble hall like a wave he couldn't ride. Ethan stood beside Lena, the air smelling of champagne and subtle cruelty, while strangers congratulated her with smiles too sharp to be kind. Fine? She sparkled under the chandelier's gold light, confident and composed, until someone asked about his studio, her cue to deliver the joke. Her voice, lilting with irony, called his work a cute side project, and the crowd erupted. The words hit harder than the laughter. They carried the sting of truth she'd been too proud to hide. He felt the room tilt, his pulse loud in his ears. Glass clinked, music swelled, and in that crescendo of humiliation he turned to her and said, calm and final, that he was done. Silence fell like dust over crystal. Lena's smile faltered, eyes widening, and for the first time all night the laughter stopped. The rain became his only witness as he stepped into the street. Each drop struck his shoulders like punctuation to an ending he never thought he'd write. The night smelled of asphalt and regret, and though the city moved around him, taxis, neon, the hum of lives untouched by his, he felt utterly still. In his mind, her laughter replayed, twisted, echoing with the crowd's approval. He thought of the ring on the marble table, of how simple it was to end something so complex. Somewhere behind him, the party still burned bright, but he no longer belonged to that light. For the first time in years, his silence felt like power. He reached his apartment past midnight, the city lights replaced by the quiet hum of solitude. The air smelled faintly of paint and unfinished plans, remnants of the studio he built with hope she once admired. He dropped his keys on the counter, the sound too loud in the empty space. On the wall, blueprints stared back at him, lines that once represented dreams of building a future together. Now, they were just paper. He leaned against the table, chest tight, replaying every glance, every moment she'd chosen image over intimacy. He realized he hadn't lost her tonight. He'd simply uncovered the truth that she'd already gone. Lena sat in the back of a black car, city lights sliding over the tinted glass. The laughter had long died, replaced by an ache that no apology could soothe. Her reflection in the window showed someone she barely recognized, polished, powerful, and utterly hollow. Marcus's voice filled the silence, offering comfort disguised as charm, but she barely heard him. Her phone buzzed with messages from guests gossiping about the scene. She closed her eyes, realizing the cost of her performance. Beneath the mascara and the power dress, she'd lost something far rarer than reputation. Morning light crept across Ethan's floor like forgiveness he hadn't earned. Coffee steamed beside untouched toast. His phone vibrated again and again, her name flashing each time, a rhythm of what once was. He didn't answer. Instead, he opened the window, letting in the city's noise, as if to remind himself life still moved. His eyes drifted to the small model on his desk, the one he'd built for her dream house. Now, just cardboard and glue. He picked it up, turned it once in his hands, and placed it gently in the trash. The sound it made was softer than he expected, almost kind. Days passed, but the silence in Ethan's apartment thickened like smoke. The world outside his window kept spinning. Delivery trucks, morning joggers, laughter from the cafe downstairs. But inside, time moved different. He hadn't spoken to anyone since the party. Every surface seemed to echo her absence. Her mug still in the sink, her scarf hanging on the back of a chair, the faint scent of her perfume trapped in the fabric of his couch. He didn't cry. He didn't rage. He simply existed in the stillness, replaying the moment he said he was done, wondering if the calm in his voice had been courage or surrender. Outside, rain returned, tapping the glass like an old habit trying to come back inside. Lena arrived at her office to the smell of fresh coffee and whispers. The story had already traveled, her promotion overshadowed by the breakup spectacle. She caught fragments of conversation as she walked past, laughter quickly stifled, glances exchanged behind glowing screens. She kept her smile painted on, the same one she wore at the party, though it cracked at the edges. In her glass-walled office, she stared at the skyline, the city stretching endlessly, confident, cold, indifferent. She typed an email she wouldn't send, then deleted it. When Marcus stopped by with his rehearsed sympathy, she didn't answer his charm. For the first time in her polished career, she felt small beneath the fluorescent light. Ethan wandered through his studio for the first time since the breakup, the air thick with dust and neglect. Canvases leaned against the wall, designs half finished, dreams half forgotten. He ran a hand over one model, a structure that once symbolized their future home. The fragile cardboard edges bent under his touch. He lit a match, not out of anger, but as a ritual. The flame flickered, catching the paper's corner, and the smoke rose like memory leaving. As it burned, he whispered something only the walls could hear, a quiet farewell to the man who needed her approval to feel enough. The firelight danced across the room, painting him in something like rebirth. Marcus found Lena alone in the conference room that evening, city lights shimmering through the windows. He leaned against the table, voice smooth with practiced concern. He spoke about damage control, about keeping her image intact. But there was a glint in his eye that told a different story, one of opportunity. She listened, silent, realizing he enjoyed her downfall a little too much. When he placed a hand on her shoulder, she stepped away. "I made one mistake," she said quietly. "And it wasn't him." The words hung between them like a confession neither could answer. For the first time, Marcus didn't have something clever to say. Later that night, Ethan met Mara for coffee at their old haunt, a small cafe tucked between bookstores. She looked at him the way only an old friend could, without pity, but with understanding. "You did what most people can't," she said softly. "You walked away before you forgot who you were." He smiled faintly, eyes down on the steam rising from his cup. The world outside still felt sharp, but her words dulled the edges a little. When she asked what he'd do next, he simply said, "Build." And though he didn't know what that meant yet, the way he said it made the words sound like hope beginning to form shape. Ethan's studio had begun to breathe again. Blueprints lay open on the table, and the faint hum of his computer replaced silence with motion. But peace was fragile. One evening, as he sorted through messages from clients, a name caught his eye. Marcus Doyle. Attached was an image from the night of the party. Marcus whispering to Lena, her face half lit, half lost. Beneath it, a message from an anonymous sender read. He made sure she laughed. The words coiled through Ethan's thoughts, sharp and venomous. He realized her betrayal hadn't bloomed in isolation. It had been watered by someone who enjoyed watching him fall. His heart didn't race. It steadied. Clarity, not anger, began to form. Lena sat alone in the break room, staring at her untouched coffee. The walls, once filled with chatter, now seemed to absorb her silence. She scrolled through her phone, seeing fragments of gossip on social media, blurry photos, cruel captions, anonymous opinions dissecting her downfall. But one message stopped her. A forwarded email thread between Marcus and a colleague joking about the show at the party. Her pulse throbbed in her ears as she read the lines twice. Then a third time, shame gave way to anger, raw and trembling. She realized how easily she'd been played, how her need to impress had been weaponized. For the first time since that night, she felt something like resolve. Ethan printed the photo and pinned it to his wall beside blueprints, not as revenge fuel, but as evidence of what he'd survived. He didn't plan confrontation, he planned closure. When Mara stopped by with her camera, she noticed the image, eyes narrowing. "You thinking of going after them?" she asked. He shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "I'm thinking of building something that outlives them." His tone wasn't bitter. It was steady, grounded. She smiled, understanding. "Then let's show them what real work looks like." For the first time in weeks, Ethan's shoulders eased. The wound hadn't healed, but it had stopped bleeding. Marcus entered Lena's office later that day, exuding confidence he hadn't earned. He carried a folder under his arm, pretending professionalism, but his eyes gleamed with control. Lena didn't offer him a seat. "You think you're untouchable," she said, voice calm, trembling only at the edges. She slid a printed copy of the email across the desk. His smirk faltered. For a moment, the power dynamic shifted, and she saw the fear behind his charm. "Get out," she said, each word deliberate. He hesitated, gauging whether she meant it. Then he left. The door shut softly, but the sound reverberated through her chest, like liberation. Night settled over the city, soft and forgiving. Ethan stood on his balcony, phone in hand, staring at Lena's unsent message on his screen. I didn't know what he planned. "I'm sorry." He read it twice, then set the phone down. Forgiveness was tempting, but peace demanded distance. Below him, headlights streamed through the streets, lives intersecting, diverging, never stopping. He felt the quiet pulse of the city matching his own. The pain had become direction, and for the first time, the idea of creating something for himself, not for approval, felt within reach. He didn't respond. Instead, he opened his sketchbook and began to draw. The first day of filming began with silence, not the kind that weighed heavy, but the kind that made space. Mara adjusted her camera, the lens catching Ethan's hands as he arranged tools across the wooden table. "Just work," she said softly. "Pretend I'm not here." He nodded, lost in focus. Every line he drew felt deliberate, every motion anchored in purpose. The camera tracked his process, not his pain. The rebuild of something internal. Light streamed through the tall studio windows, dust particles swirling like quiet applause. As the sound of pencil on paper filled the air, Ethan realized that the camera wasn't capturing what he'd lost. It was documenting how he was finding himself again. They moved to the construction site, where concrete met sky in skeletal form. Ethan walked through the half-built structure, explaining its design. A space for people who feel unseen. He told the microphone clipped to his collar. Mara filmed from a distance, her camera steady, capturing the rhythm of his footsteps against steel and dust. The design wasn't just architecture. It was confession rendered in material. As he spoke, his voice carried something Lena had never heard in him. Conviction without apology. The crew adjusted lighting. Wind swept through the open beams, and in that raw frame of imperfection, Ethan's new story began to take shape. By the third week, the documentary had evolved into something intimate. Ethan found himself speaking openly, not just about design, but about failure, pride, and the quiet dignity of starting again. "People think collapse means destruction," he said on camera. "But sometimes it's the only way to see the foundation clearly." Mara stayed silent behind the lens, but her eyes said everything. She was no longer filming an architect rebuilding. She was filming a man rediscovering meaning. When he finished, there was no applause. Only the hum of the city outside and the shared understanding that the story had shifted from pain to purpose. Lena found the teaser online one evening, a short clip Mara had released to promote the documentary. Ethan's voice filled her living room, steady and raw. "Sometimes you have to lose everything that wasn't meant to stay." The words landed heavy. On screen, she saw him, surrounded by scaffolding and sunlight, unguarded and free. She pressed pause, staring at his face frozen mid-sentence. It was the same man she had mocked, but different, steadier, lighter, beyond her reach. She wanted to send a message to say she was proud, or sorry, or both, but she didn't. Instead, she whispered to the silence, "You were always enough," and closed the laptop. The final shoot took place at sunset. The structure now stood complete. Open walls, curved steel frames, and glass panels that caught the fading light like hope made tangible. Mara filmed as Ethan stepped back to look at it. Eyes soft, expression unreadable. "What do you call it?" she asked behind the camera. He thought for a moment. "The hollow?" he said, "because sometimes emptiness has its own beauty." The camera lingered on his face, wind ruffling his hair, city lights flickering awake beyond him. It wasn't a monument to loss anymore. It was a space for a reflection, built from the pieces of what had once been broken. Lena watched from her office window as the city stretched beneath her, glittering and indifferent. The premiere of Ethan's documentary had gone viral overnight. Articles, interviews, snippets of his quiet voice threading through social feeds. Her coworkers spoke about it with admiration, unaware of her connection to the man behind the screen. Each word of praise scraped at her composure until she could barely breathe. She had spent years mastering control, but now the walls of that persona felt paper-thin. She wanted to be proud, to share in his light, but guilt shadowed every thought. Her reflection in the glass seemed foreign. Success without substance, beauty without peace. Somewhere below, he was becoming whole again. She was still pretending to be. The meeting began like any other. Charts, projections, polite small talk, until Marcus's name surfaced. Carr had launched an internal review after multiple complaints, and Luana's involvement in the office party came up in whispers. Though she wasn't accused of wrongdoing, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations paused when she entered rooms. Emails arrived curt and formal. Her achievements, once celebrated, were now footnotes to scandal. She tried to stay composed, taking notes, maintaining her poised tone, but her hands trembled beneath the table. For the first time, the image she'd built to be admired became the reason she was alone in a crowd of her own making. At home, the silence felt heavier than any accusation. Lena scrolled through messages on her phone, most unread, some cruel. Her social calendar had evaporated overnight. The invitations stopped. Friends who once clung to her light drifted away the moment it dimmed. On her counter sat a half-drunk glass of wine and the unopened mail from HR. A notice about her temporary suspension. She laughed once, softly, at the irony. The woman who had mocked someone for following his dream was now losing her own for protecting an illusion. Tears came without permission, hot and wordless. Outside, rain began to fall. The same kind that had witnessed her undoing months ago. Days blurred. Sleep became a stranger. Lena began walking aimlessly at night, through streets once vibrant, now unfamiliar. She stopped in front of a bookstore window one evening and saw Ethan's face on the screen, a documentary advertisement playing on loop. The tagline read, "From failure to foundation." For a moment, she smiled, not out of jealousy or sorrow, but recognition. He had built something true. She had built something fragile. She whispered his name to the glass, half hoping the universe might carry it to him. Then she kept walking, letting the cold air remind her that pain could also be cleansing. The letter came quietly. No warning, no emotion. Termination effective immediately. She read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it beside her laptop. For a long time, she didn't move. The city outside was awake, indifferent to her collapse. Yet, beneath the ache, something inside her softened. Freedom had come disguised as failure. She made tea instead of wine, sat by the window, and opened her journal for the first time in years. Her handwriting shook, but the words came. I want to remember who I was before the applause. The night didn't comfort her, but it listened. And for the first time since the party, she let it. Ethan didn't expect to see her again. The installation had reopened for public viewing, and Mara was hosting a small event to celebrate the film's success. Guests drifted through the open structure, whispering about its meaning, photographing its lines. He stood quietly at the edge, feeling both proud and detached, until he saw her. Lena moved through the crowd like someone searching for a version of herself she'd left behind. Their eyes met across the glass panel that once symbolized his emptiness. For a moment, neither moved. Then she stepped closer, her reflection merging with his in the glass. The world around them blurred into silence. Time, it seemed, had waited for this. They stood apart, separated by air heavy with words unsaid. I saw the film, Lena began, her voice barely rising above the distant hum of conversation. You built something beautiful. Ethan nodded once, polite, distant. "You helped," he replied, not as praise, but truth. She flinched slightly at the weight behind it. Silence stretched between them, fragile and real. "I wasn't kind," she said, her eyes lowering. "I thought I had to be perfect, and you were a mirror I didn't want to look into." He studied her, expression unreadable. "You weren't the only one," he said softly. The admission hung between them, quiet and disarming. Forgiveness didn't arrive like thunder. It breathed like wind. Mara watched from a distance, her camera lowered. She had been filming the event, but something in their posture told her to stop. The lens couldn't capture what was happening. Only the human eye could. Ethan and Lena moved closer, still cautious, like strangers retracing an old language. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said. He exhaled slowly. "Maybe I already did." The simplicity of it cut deeper than any accusation. There was no dramatic embrace, no apology rehearsed for redemption, just the quiet acknowledgement that pain had shaped them both. Mara smiled faintly, realizing her documentary had just found its final unscripted scene. They walked together through the empty structure after the guests had gone. Footsteps echoed softly, the sound mingling with wind through steel frames. Lena ran her fingers along the glass panels, tracing the etched patterns. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "It's honest," Ethan corrected. She smiled at that. Small, real, fragile. When they reached the exit, she paused. "I'm sorry for who I was," she said quietly, "and I'm grateful for who you became." Ethan met her eyes, the ache replaced by something lighter. "We build what we're ready to live in," he said. She nodded, holding his gaze a final moment before turning toward the city lights. The night didn't demand closure. It simply offered space. Later, alone in the structure, Ethan looked up at the open sky framed by steel and glass. The city hummed below, alive and distant. He thought of her walking away, not with bitterness but with understanding. The architecture around him wasn't a monument to heartbreak anymore. It was a reminder that love, even when it fails, leaves foundations worth keeping. He closed his eyes, breathing in the cool night air, feeling the world settle around him. Somewhere out there, she was starting over too. The thought didn't hurt. It simply existed, like the echo of a song once sung, fading, but never gone. Morning spilled through Ethan's apartment like an old friend. The blueprints on his desk were new, cleaner, more daring, untouched by ghosts of what came before. The documentary had gone global. His inbox overflowed with invitations, praise, and proposals. Yet he sat quietly with his coffee, unmoved by the noise. Success felt different now. Steady, grounded, earned. He glanced at a newspaper headline about the Hollow's impact on modern architecture and smiled faintly. The world had noticed his work, but the victory wasn't external. It was the calm within, the silence that no longer hurt. He picked up a pencil, drew the first line of a new project, and knew he didn't need anyone to see it for it to matter. Across the city, Lena started her own morning differently. The suit jackets had been replaced by worn sweaters, the high-rise office by a small, co-working space above a bakery. She was consulting small businesses now, helping others find voices that felt real, not polished. Her laugh, once careful and rehearsed, came easily as she spoke to a young artist about branding her first project. There were no reporters, no glass offices, no applause, only the quiet satisfaction of honest work. When she took her lunch to the park nearby, she saw a newspaper on a bench, Ethan's structure printed on the front page. She smiled, not from nostalgia but from recognition. Some endings were really beginnings disguised. Mara premiered the full documentary that weekend at an independent film festival. The theater lights dimmed, and the screen came alive with Ethan's quiet wisdom and the stillness of the Hollow. The audience sat spellbound, moved not by tragedy but by truth. When the credits rolled, applause rose like thunder. Mara didn't look at the screen. She looked at Ethan sitting in the back row. expression calm, almost humble. He didn't stand, didn't wave, just smiled faintly, as if acknowledging something greater than praise. Later, as they stepped into the evening air, she said, "You finally built something that doesn't need to be seen to exist." He nodded. That was the point. Weeks later, Lena visited the hollow. It was quiet that afternoon, sunlight filtering through glass, children playing in the open courtyard. She walked slowly through the space, fingertips brushing steel beams that felt colder than memory. On one panel, she found a small inscription she hadn't noticed before, built on what remains. She smiled, tears gathering without sorrow. Standing in that light, she realized redemption wasn't forgiveness. It was the decision to keep living with grace. As she turned to leave, she whispered a thank you, not expecting him to hear it, but hoping the wind might carry it anyway. The final scene belonged to the city, alive, vast, and endlessly moving. Ethan walked along the waterfront at dusk, the skyline glowing behind him, while Mara's narration from the documentary played in his memory. Healing isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering differently. He stopped by the railing, feeling the wind off the water, the hum of life around him. Somewhere across the skyline, Lena might have been watching the same sunset. He didn't need to know. Some stories don't need reunion. They need peace. As the last light dipped beneath the horizon, he smiled. Small, genuine, and for the first time, the silence felt like home.